Would you hire an unpaid, untrained intern and just give them your job? No, you wouldn't, right? And you wouldn't expect that to succeed. So why would you expect this to succeed? Everything's going to go back to in-person interviews because I don't know if you're using ChatGPT or unless you're talking to me at my face. When someone is an expert, they usually explain things really badly. You shouldn't ever say no to someone's improvised suggestion. You immediately shut down all creativity and thought process and everything like that.
What, Sami, are your biggest hiring challenges right now?
It's a bit of a perfect storm. You have a few different factors that are in isolation. Each of them might be somewhat manageable, and I think a lot of them have been bubbling under the surface for quite a long time. But they all hit all at once, and it's becoming a bit of a nightmare. I can speak both as a candidate and as a person who's likely to recruit staff in the future. So you first have the sort of deluge of fake jobs or auto-generated jobs, and I know that LinkedIn for a long time was doing this type of thing where it would just fuzz job descriptions. It has caused problems for us. In our previous company, we had hiring freeze, and we saw this job description for data scientist, and it wasn't something I'd author. I was head of data science at this company. We didn't author it, and we were like, "What's going on here?" People in my team were unhappy about the fact that there was a salary figure for a job that didn't exist. That and I spoke to the recruitment team. Turns out it was an auto-generated LinkedIn one that even they hadn't authorized. And I was thinking, what? Like this is awful. It's one of those things where to bump up how making the company look like it's doing really well, or bumping up investor interest in the company. I wasn't even aware of it being a good thing. I can't see it being a good thing. But so you have that, and then obviously you now have the just it doesn't take a lot to write a prompt that says spit out 20 job descriptions that are slightly different based on these types of things. If you're a recruitment agency, that's also the good ones won't do this, but the bad ones could look like they have a lot of jobs on their market and then try to get lots of interested candidates in by doing that type of thing. Then of course you have the applicants, and I think this is where the problem lies: is that the applicants are now you could apply for, I don't know, if you're really dedicated and you can accept rejection, maybe 10, 20 jobs a day. If you and you're supposed to tailor the cover letter and CV to each job and things like that. You can just do the Gatling gun approach. Doesn't work out as well. But now with ChatGPT, so here's a job description. Write my CV as if it was the perfect CV for this job description, and you can automate that. And there are people applying to thousands of jobs. And obviously there's some person that's going to review this, and then of course the problem is there's too many now, so that's now being automated away as well. And that old trick about let's write MIT, Harvard, Massachusetts, California, Caltech in white text on your CV, that's probably not going to work anymore, right? I never used it, but I like the idea. That's probably not going to work anymore as well. So you have the worst aspects of Gen AI is already kicking off there. You then have this interesting economic situation that, I mean, it's different in different countries, but even in the US, which historically rode out the storm a bit better than the rest of us from COVID and everything like that, you have a lot of layoffs happening from very high-paying and very experienced companies and skill sets in the same market as the people who don't have those skills. While there's a lot of hiring demand for really experienced, AI engineer type positions or MLOps engineer type positions. There's not enough people that have the specific expertise. There's really, really experienced people that don't quite have that expertise, but are trying to apply for this job. And so you have a lot of demand in the wrong places, in a sense, and a lot of candidates in over competing with this demand. Yeah, so there's a really specific expertise, such as AI engineer, that's emerged really quickly, and you now have to address this. And an AI engineer, from what I understand it's basically someone who can do the plumbing to get a response out of a ChatGPT-like interface. This used to be a ML engineer position, or a data scientist position who has ML experience. You don't really need to have those anymore. You should, because it's still an ML model black box. You need to understand how to get the best out of it, type thing. But you could take a risk and say, no, actually, I'm just going to plumb these in and then just put it in front of a person. That's gotten rid of 3 or 4 very specialized technical jobs. So those people aren't qualified now, and they are facing competition from someone who is in a different way. It's a really interesting trend. And obviously, during the pandemic and slightly before, inflation was in an odd place where there was lots of cheap money for companies, so that when they went on hiring sprees, and that led to this sort of glut that's caused a lot of these problems at the moment. So all of those together cause a huge bunch of issues. So I work in consultancy. I've worked in consultancy for most of my career. Most companies and consultancies too understand now that they need a data first offering, or they need to be a data driven offering company, and they need to embrace generative AI, which is in this really odd position where it's sort of here and also not here. It's based on the promise of what it could be in a few years' time. And that's led to a massive push to integrate and incorporate this technology, which isn't quite ready. It requires some bespoking. If you can imagine what it took to get ML into your company 5 years ago compared to today, it's a bit like that, except it's evolving much faster because there's so much money involved at the moment. So what you needed to do to get so 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I worked in a voice synthesis generative AI startup. To create a copy of someone's voice took a team of 5 people, a few months, and we got it down to a few days towards the end. But you needed our expertise and ability. You can now do it with a few minutes of your voice, maybe even a few seconds if you go to the right websites, and it will sound quite a lot like you. So you don't need that domain expertise anymore, and your time to live is much faster, and the product is better. But the point being, if you invested in that team, that would be a bad investment, because you now don't need to invest in that team. Could you wait another year? Are you willing to ride out that storm type thing? Where should you allocate those resources? It's really challenging to optimize for that. And as a consultancy, we have to have an offering. My view of generative AI is you need to get your data cards set up correctly so that you have the right hand that you can play when the technology is ready, when your use case that you need it for is ready, and when your customers are interested. And we're a bit far away from that. But doing that allows the client to understand what they actually have available, or even as an internal company, what data do you have? Making it available to everyone to consume and play about with, getting the product owners, data governors, the individual boots on the ground type folks to understand that they all have a role and an interest in the succeeding. If they can become more data driven as well, they can suggest the use cases that a data expert wouldn't know because they aren't a subject matter expert or the end user that would understand what the thing is. And all of that means to say that you need to have a position on this, but no company is ready. No individual person in that company is ready. And so there's this competition to build these types of offerings is competing with the same space of people building those offerings, and building the sort of other connector aspects, as well. This is also a massive hiring burst, again, sort of in the wrong places, sort of in the wrong time. If you believe that the skill set available is a finite resource, you can't train enough people that will have this skill set. If this is the new paradigm that everyone has to embrace in the future, there will be retraining and things like that, but that's going to add to the pressures of the people who are technical experts. Because if an experienced developer who's not a AI engineer plus GitHub Copilot can do the same as an experienced AI engineer, you've just added another person who could compete with that job. And it's probably for the better of society that we don't just have tech bros being the people who can run and do all business from now on. So I'm going to mention one comment. I won't say who said it. I was in a meeting recently. Somebody mentioned they were talking about the future of Gen AI, and they mentioned the words zero employee business. And I think they meant one employee business, but the idea that the business is being run just for the bots, I thought quite funny. So maybe that's the problem. The last it's extremely important point is also that with COVID having pushed a lot of people remote, so teams aren't gathering together in person anymore, that sort of magic, I can't think of a better word, that magic that you get by people working together in person or collaboratively, the fifth conference room, the one outside of the conference that everyone's talking about in the corridor, that's not happening as much anymore. And you have that coupled with this viewpoint that Gen AI will replace interns or low-level positions. So the low-level positions aren't in person anyway, and they may not need to exist anymore. That's going to cause a huge dearth of opportunity and inflow for the long term. So I'm not sure where the future is going to actually come from. I think it will be the people who embrace the tools the best, but they may not be the best people in a sense, if that makes sense. That might be the more important thing long term. Those three factors together are like a perfect storm. It's going to make hiring really difficult, which is why it's gone back to all the opposite aspects. And we may well cover this later on in the podcast, but like everything's going to go back to in-person interviews, because I don't know if you're using ChatGPT or unless you're talking to me at my face. And if you go on Implant, good on you. If you're using some glasses I don't know about, right? But I want to know about what you know, right? And we all know that you can cheat on the test if you have a calculator or whatever next to you. But I'd like to know how you think and your conceptual stuff. This has made finding good candidates more difficult. Despite everything I said, there's loads of good people looking for jobs. There's loads of good jobs available. But actually matching them together in this way is quite complicated at the moment. And I hope it resolves, but I'm not optimistic on this, honestly.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a fight to the bottom.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, a fight to the who can use AI the most or something.
The first person that works out how best to use it will get this leap advantage. generational advantage over the next, and then everyone will copy them, and it will be always who's first, and it will not be the players you think. I mean, just using the generative AI models as an example, these companies like Anthropic and Mixtral and OpenAI, like you had heard of some of them, but they aren't Microsoft and Google and Amazon. It's companies you wouldn't have heard of, and
Yeah.
this is going to happen again. And there's a little bit of a sort of it's a new person's game, and that's not the right expression. It's something like that. But the thing is that it is right. Is that if you're thinking right, we have a team of 1,000 that can do this, you won't face the same intellectual challenges that will be like, we have only 3 people, we have to solve it a different way. So it wouldn't surprise me. Like it might be for recruitment specifically, the one person recruitment agency that embraces these tools the best, not the established player with tens of thousands of candidates and 4,000 recruiters. It might well be the case.
Yeah, it does seem like we're on the precipice of some major change, but it's just not quite there yet. Every time I use a large language model, I'm always sort of initially impressed, but then once I keep digging, I'm like, oh, hang on, this isn't good at all.
This is exactly the problem. And I've seen varying different analyses, and the one that I believe, because it feels intuitive based on my experience as well, and it sounds like you've had similar experience. If you know nothing about a topic, it can leapfrog you a little bit above the rest, but you don't know what you don't know, so it might give you a false confidence. If you have expert level knowledge, the types of tasks you would be using this to do to fill in the gaps in your knowledge aren't solvable by the Gen AIs. So it's the middle tier, the people who are mid experienced who like they know how to do something, they just want it to do it for them, type thing, right? They have an ability to sanity check the output. That's not where most people are in any field. So the idea that this will just be this, personal expert or digital Aristotle, I've heard it called that. Like it will teach you everything you need to know. Great, but there's a lot of falsehood in there, and it's not because people are ill-meaning. Like there's a lot of falsehood on the internet, but you can generally trust Wikipedia, and then you should do your research on it. Where's the equivalent for this? Like there isn't a new thing you need to do. You just need to do the task again properly and then confirm it's the same output, right? That doesn't, you see the problem, right? It's like humans. It's not like there's going to be a certain, oh, I now know the answer. You might think you know the answer the whole time. Somebody tells you a different answer. You don't know whether they're right. You need to, it's all based on fuzziness, and there's no certainty. One of the things that's terrifying, I'm not going to talk much about my scientific background unless you really want to go into it. But one of the things that's terrifying about the bare metal of science is nobody knows anything. It's all based on fuzz, and you think, and it's hard to maintain sanity when you think, but we don't know anything. It's all assumptions, all the way down. The lights are on, and we're not fighting each other. This doesn't make any sense. Like this isn't supposed to happen, right? And the odds of it happening are so low. And I hated that, right? That's the reason I left science is because I wanted to know things, and you can't know anything. But this is very similar to that, right? As a former neuroscientist, it's beautiful to see these things. Fundamentally, when one tries to understand something like the subject of consciousness, like what makes us different from the apes or whatever, right? It's a bunch of connections. That's it. Like that doesn't make any sense. How could that lead to anything? And then you see this thing, which is a bunch of connections. It is cheating because it's using all of human text generated ever, right, and images and whatever, right. So it's going to learn the statistical trends that our brains have learned and evolved to produce. But it's still cool to see that, but it isn't trustworthy. Just like you wouldn't, I've started to use the expression unpaid intern, unpaid untrained intern, right? Would you hire an unpaid untrained intern and just give them your job? No, you wouldn't, right? And you wouldn't expect that to succeed. So why would you expect this to succeed?
Yeah, I think the key thing is we need to be very cognizant of its limitations, and everyone who's using them has to be questioning it in a way that they're probably not expecting, or especially if I think about like teenagers or whatever, so let's call them almost like AI natives. If this is all they're used to now, this is just normal. I want to find something out, I go to ChatGPT, and if they're not consciously thinking, oh, this has got a, I don't know, 30% chance of being complete bollocks or a 10% chance of being partly wrong.
I'll be completely frank and say that those critical thinking skills are difficult to find in broader society. The sad rise of things like fake news and the susceptibility of people to be tricked, and distrust of and mistrust of people and websites trying to rectify that. Because oh no, I read 10 people that said this, but this website says I'm wrong, but it was written by the other side and things like that. You've just amplified that problem millions fold by this extra, as you said, massive spam filter on steroids, spam generation machine and steroids. Those skills are difficult to find, and they're difficult to develop as well. Speaking personally, it's not easy to do that, right? It's hard, actually. So I'm going to go back to science. Science was I had a really interesting lecture set about the politics of science, transformational, back in my undergraduate, and it was talking about how do you get a project to be funded when you need nation state level funding when you don't know if it will succeed? because politicians don't fund that type of research. So they were talking about the Human Genome Project and the over-promising and under-delivering of it. Very, very important project. But the scientists knew, they weren't well-meaning. They knew that it wasn't going to produce the things that presidents of the US were saying on TV, but they needed the money and they knew it would be important. And they were willing to play a game that I was unwilling to play as a scientist. And I that's why I had to leave. Again, it's one of the other reasons I left myself. But intentionally adding a new term to your paper because, oh, look, this is cutting edge research, but it's actually the same thing that existed before. That type of stuff. I felt really slimy when I realized I was in this, but you need to do this to succeed to some extent. And I don't like that. It's hard. I remember reading papers for the first time properly, full academic papers, and assuming the person was right because they were a scientist, learned scientist. I read another paper by an as learned scientist by the exact opposite viewpoint. And I thought, these can't both be true. And I have no way of knowing which one is true. I could ask my boss, but he's read the same papers as me. He has no other, unless he's read a third paper that he can give me. There's no third thing that can disambiguate. I have to decide, but I have no information. It's really tricky. You can spend years trying to train yourself to do this. And if somebody just says, here's the answer, as all of the startups and the big economic players are doing, they're not going to say, actually, you need to study for a few years to understand how to tease apart information. I'm going to share one more anecdote. I was asked by a friend of mine to prepare what does AI mean for gaming, and presentation. So I gave one, and it's a gaming company, and they were interested in like the aspects of that. And I was going to joke. This is just as ChatGPT was starting to come into prominence. I was going to joke. I just typed in what is AI gaming in 2024 and just put it into ChatGPT and printed out the answer. And I tried to do that, and I said, write me a literature review about AI in video games in 2024. And it said I can't do that. That would be unethical, whatever. And I swear to God, I opened a new tab, not even an incognito, a new tab, asked the same question and just spat it out. And I thought, great, fantastic, this is amazing. The guardrails do not work. Isn't this brilliant?
Oh, that's perfect. Now, if I'm not mistaken, when the printing press was first created, it was used as a massive propaganda tool, despite our memories of it more positively. So I guess this is what these tools will be used for. Yeah.
It's much easier to use it for evil. It's much more straightforward. Like that's always what comes to people's minds first. Like the atomic weapon versus the atomic energy. It's a shame.
Right. Now, in light of all these changes, as you said, this kind of perfect storm happening in hiring, has this already impacted how you think about hiring, how you have run your hiring process, how you will run your hiring process?
In short, yes. One has to be mindful of that stuff we just discussed. So I think we'll return to in-person interviews, which is a problem because what if we're hiring international candidates? What if we're not able to get the candidates to travel in, or we can't afford the travel expenses, or whatever else? Well, it will restrict the pool of candidates that we can work with. It's probably also going to be based on networking or people that we've met before, discussed. That's not a bad thing, but it does lessen the. You'd hope it would be a meritocracy, not based on who you know or awareness of one person versus the other. It immediately I love working from home. I love going to the office, but I like the mix. If you say I need you to come in for an interview, essentially that person now needs to come in an extra day, if that makes sense, right? It's a shame, but I think it's a necessity, and I think even putting aside stuff like the deep faking aspect, just simply I want to know what the person knows, not what they can ask ChatGPT, and it's hard. And I remember I had the advantage that the person had not planned this very well, but I asked a question about, maybe I should explain how the hiring process goes and then explain about some of the aspects. Sorry, I should do that. What I've established before, and we'll probably replicate a similar process here. We work in consultancy. We want people that can have a good understanding of what they don't know, but can speculate about areas that they don't know. And so they have some instinct or gut feeling. They can have an informed conversation with an expert, say, data engineer, if they're a data scientist, without like completely noping out of it or just deferring all the person. They want to try to make an informed effort to say, understand their world. At Global Logic, we call this a T-shaped individual. So you have your central expertise and you have fringe expertises, ideally two of them. For data science, you might say data engineering and business intelligence or data visualization type thing, right? And so I'd ask questions about data engineering. And I remember seeing a candidate, literally you could see his eyes darting like this because he clearly was Googling the answer. And I had to tell him, please, I'm not asking you what you don't know. I want you to tell me what you do know. And if the answer is I don't know, that's completely fine, right? There's no problem there. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect of whether it's in person or not is live interview tests, like not allowing the candidate to prep ahead of time, which again is a bit of a nasty thing to do. I've been told it's a harsh interview tactic. One of the things I've done as a consultant is interview people as if I was a client. I'd ask them really obtuse, poorly defined questions. I'm not going to name any names. I've had similar questions from clients before. I'll give an example and say, yeah, hi, I'm a fashion business and I have 10,000 data points. What can I do? And I would wait for the person to ask questions. And the first thing, it happens every time, right? We live in a specific end of a particular spectrum. Let's just put it that way, right? So when they talk to me as if I'm not the candidate, the client, and say, well, I don't have enough information. It's like, right, you can ask questions to this mock interviewee, right? So they gradually get out of the box and ask these questions, and I'll fill in gaps for them. But the intention is, for 20 minutes, we're going to do this. And I want you to solution on this. I want you to convince me as this skeptical pseudo client, right? And I try to explain to people that this is the element that Gen AIs will not do very well for a while. You might be talking to somebody who is not cooperating with you, and you don't know why. And it could be because they had a bad day, could be because they've got some issues in their personal life that they shouldn't be bringing to work. But we're all humans, right? Well, some of us for now are humans. You don't know whether their job is at risk. There's a redundancy process going on. You don't know if the thing you're building is going to obsolete a core part of their workflow. They don't believe you. They don't trust you. They don't like the technology you're involved in. You need to work with all of that, and you need to learn your strategy for developing that, which is not to say I can't work with this guy because you just lost the project. It's the first company or person that can work with this person. I've gone through a client that had all of those issues simultaneously, and I wish I was joking. It was a nightmare. I didn't know any of this, so I couldn't help. I couldn't do anything about it. Right? I've had clients run. I'm sorry for my French. Shit tests, where it's basically like we want to see if you think the right way. So I had to replicate something they already had. And I was like, well, that's silly. Why did you ask me to duplicate work? You could have talked me through that. That was, yeah. So sorry, again, that's a tangent. Apologies. But the thing is that, yeah, I want to know, can you handle that situation? Because I know without ChatGPT, I know that you can overcome any technical obstacle, right? If you're an interesting person, you probably and motivated person, you probably can learn new technology. You probably can do the right Stack Overflow queries to pass your job, right? What we do in consultancy data science is not very difficult from a programming perspective. It's what's in this data? What do I think I could find if I did something with it? And how do I communicate that to the client? That communication aspect is number one. And that's the hardest bit to interview for. It's the hardest bit for someone to do preparation for. So we might lean more on that. And the one other thing that I'm not sure about what we will do in the future, I have used technical tests before, and usually it's just about saying, something like Amazon have a deep learning toolkit available. What's it called? Like I'll say stuff like that because that might be less likely to come out of someone's general knowledge or something. If they've used the tool, they know, oh, Amazon SageMaker allows you to build machine learning models. Oh, okay, I mean SageMaker, yeah, that type of stuff. So I'll do that frequently. I'll say, pick your cloud of choice. We'll focus on that, but I'd like to know if you know Amazon's cloud. We'll come up with like a rough talked over solution architecture for a specific problem that they wouldn't have faced before. If they have faced it, they talk through what they've done in the past, like that type of stuff to try and make them be a bit more live. I've done in my past sort of a take home interview test type thing. And the problem with that is it turns off a lot of people. And I understand why. I've been on the receiving end of it. It's a huge amount of preparation. I got criticized by a company for bad time management because I didn't get it back to them by their deadline. And I couldn't explain to them enough. It's like, you are hiring for a senior position. I have a demanding job. I don't know what you were expecting. You gave it to me on a Monday and you expected it by the Tuesday. I couldn't do it. You didn't tell me you were going to give it to me with 1 day's notice. I told you a different day type thing. What I've done instead is to say, hey, if you have a portfolio of code you have written and it's on your GitHub or something you can send to me or reference, I can take a look at that and I have an understanding whether you have some ability. Now, that might be a bit more challenging because if you can spit out something that is clearly not yours, is clearly not someone else's, but could be yours, that's going to be a bit more difficult. And you can't run the code, which is usually the thing that tells you whether it is AI generated or not, if it doesn't work. That's going to be a bit trickier for like actually assessing technical ability. And if you have a rapid interview process, we've had candidates in my past that we needed in a few days' time and for a short-term need or something. Spinning up a development environment or a leak code type thing, it's not really feasible. So you sort of have to take their trust. And I've had people in my team before, at my previous company, I should stress, I've had people in my team before assume someone has more knowledge than they did because they came across when someone is an expert, they usually explain things really badly, and that's not a good trait of experts, right? You should be able to explain things properly. But that we interviewed someone who's perhaps the worst candidate I've ever interviewed, and he's so bad at expressing himself. And I remember speaking to my team and saying, "You wasted my time, guys. What the hell?" And they said, "We thought he had no experience with interviews." And I said, I spoke to him. He said he literally came off an entire day of interviews on the day I interviewed him. He did not present well, unfortunately. And it shouldn't be this way because society should be more inclusive, tolerant, whatever. But it is this way. If the client speaks to someone and they don't like the person they're speaking to, or it doesn't come across well, or they don't warm to them, it's not great. And if I, as the interviewer, don't get that impression, it's probably not going to go well for the clients either. So, um, again, sorry, a bit of a ramble, but I would say that the dream of hiring is you have a standardized process that anyone can be involved in. And that's coming far and far away, further away from where we were with that, because now it needs to be bespoke to getting the candidate in. Some of them do want to do steps, some of them don't want to do steps. I'm not actually sure anymore. And I feel like generative AI in the future could be a really good tool, like a pre-screening tool, but not now. And you can't count on the responses back from that not being generative AI, which is the big problem.
If you think about all the different candidates who you've interviewed, some ultimately got the job, the vast majority didn't. Are there any patterns you've recognized among those two groups that kind of differentiate typically the successful from unsuccessful candidates?
If you, on your CV, say your experience accurately and you apply for a job which you have qualifications for and you interview, you should get the job. You might not, you might be worthy of getting the job but miss out to someone else who had high qualifications or whatever else. So the number one rule is don't apply for a job you can't do, or don't lie on your CV. And there is some embellishment people do. I personally don't. If you're going to do it to a ridiculous extent, don't. So my story is I got interviewed for a big data engineer position 5 years ago over the phone. I didn't know why they were interviewing me. It was one of those platforms where you get matched to jobs, so they picked me, if that makes sense. And I said, well, you can clearly see on my CV that I don't have experience with big data engineering, but maybe it's like an aspirational one. Maybe they mean data science because the job roles are not always clearly defined. And about 10 minutes in, on the phone, I could hear them say, why are we interviewing this guy? Um, uh, and it's one of the funniest. I could have taken such offense to this, thinking, "Why are you interviewing me? Why are you wasting my time? You were the one who picked me." But I laughed at that, thinking, "You didn't even like hang up the call on mute or say, hey, I'm sorry, you don't have the skill set we're looking for." I thought it was so funny. So that's a good example. If you're looking for a data engineer, don't hire a data scientist, maybe, and that'd be number one. Uh, so the main other one, and we talked about this a bit earlier, but yeah, if they are bad at presenting and articulating an interview, they will be bad at presenting and articulating in front of customers. Unsurprisingly, right, for a consultancy company. This will be a story I will share about a company from many years ago. We were part of an interview panel. This person was very, very bad at expressing themselves. It is unfortunate that if English is not your first language, you will have a higher hurdle to match to do this. We recommended a hard no. We didn't know if they had the technical experience and expertise. They did not have the communication skills to articulate what their ability was. When they joined the company, so we were overruled by our head of delivery. We hired them in. One of the reasons that might be the case for this was we were growing like this, and our team was here, so we needed to match the growth rate. It's always a painful problem when you're in that sort of explosive growth phase. And this company was also very, very restrictive on the use of contractors, which is fine. I understand the premise, but you shouldn't get somebody bad in as a permanent. It's much harder to get rid of a bad permanent person. It doesn't work out for either side, right? This person was hired against everyone's suggestions, and on client calls would literally say, I don't know how to answer this. I don't know how to solve your problem type thing. And it's one of those things where a big unwritten rule in consultancy is at the very least, you should say, let me get back to you or something like that. Or say, I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to this, but I will look into it type thing. You shouldn't, it's like improvisation. If you've ever seen stand-up comedy, you just say no. Like you shouldn't ever say no to someone's improvised suggestion. You immediately shut down all creativity and thought process and everything like that. It comes across really badly. This person did not last at the company very long, so we did no favors bringing them in. But that was an example of an unsuccessful candidate. So generally, those are the patterns. It's nothing fancy or sophisticated. It shouldn't surprise anyone what my conclusions are on that.
So you're implying almost then that most of the time the right candidate gets the job, and it's almost like each stage is reasonably accurate. The recruiter looking through a CV for 5 seconds is 90 something percent accurate. The first interview is fit. You're implying there's almost an existing meritocracy. Is that what you're saying, or
That's how it should be. I guess I would ask the opposite question because it sounds like you're asking me a leading question. When are the cases that doesn't work, right? So you have people who misrepresent on their CV. If they have misrepresented to the extent where they can't answer the technical questions, that should pop out of the technical interview. Otherwise, something is wrong with the process. So I've not come across a candidate that has done well at all of those stages and gotten the job and then turned out to be a bad candidate. I'll put it that way, if that makes sense.
So you found that performance in the hiring process generally correlates quite well to performance on the job. That's really fascinating. I wonder, actually thinking about it now, if in consulting, interview performance is actually quite a strong measure of on the job performance because you're always kind of in front of clients. Whereas if you're like a data analyst in a tech company and 90% of your work is in the visualization tool in SQL and what have you, you don't have to be kind of on the ball thinking of stuff as you go, kind of like an interview. Maybe it makes more sense why it tends to not correlate as much.
Yeah, possibly. What I would say is, if you are in the cases where I have hired, it's been into a team where you are going to be surrounded by some technical experts more senior than you. If it's just me, fair enough. That can help you along with that journey. In the case where uh, it's a marketing company doing B2B marketing, and you are the data hire, you don't have that fallback. So the performance for that person, if they had the technical expertise and all that sort of stuff, and let's say that another firm was brought in to do that technical interview, as I would probably suggest, because, well, if you don't have technical skills, how can you assess whether the person you're hiring is the right hire? If that's the case, and they don't do well, I would put that on the situation around the person rather than the person. If someone passed the interview process and just doesn't do their job, we're talking about a different version of events, obviously. I have seen that again. It's very obvious. Like, it's the sort of thing where I'm going to share one story. This is, again, I was not involved in the interview process, so I didn't say this until now. If you meet a technical person who types like this, ask some questions. It's happened twice in my career, and both of them weren't very good, and both of them got fired very shortly after they got joined. They were both quite senior hires. I wish I was joking. I'm not. Right? The CEO of one of my previous companies typed like this, and I was like, I understand. But when a senior consultant or a principal consultant is typing like this, I have some problems with that.
What an interesting proxy. Yeah, I used to try to think about some of those little things in hiring, like just little indicators you'd get in the interview process or even in the first week, like can they turn up on time? Did they answer my question when I asked them a question? Those kinds of little things.
Can they join a Google Meet? Jesus Christ! We had a candidate we were interviewing really short notice hire recently for three different candidates, and one of them just couldn't join the meeting. I'm like, okay,
Yep.
so if you're on a client meeting and you can't join the meeting, are you going to do well?
I remember someone who used to hire data scientists and they would have like a take-home case study type of thing. And they had a step zero, which was they sent them the data set. It was like in a Google Drive folder or something, or Dropbox or whatever. And they explained like this is step zero is to be able to unlock the data set. Like it had a password protect or something. But I think it was they had to unhash it first. And they made it abundantly like, trust me, this works. Like there's no issue with this. You will be able to do it. But as you said, it was amazing the number of people who would drop off at that point, thinking that it was just an issue with how he'd set it up. But I was like, well, no, that's step zero. Is you just have to be able to solve these little problems that are inevitably going to come up. I thought that was quite an interesting approach.
Something came to mind actually when you mentioned that. I interviewed a company a number of years ago. They gave me a take-home interview task, and I did the task exactly as it said in the thing. It was like completing the code to do a particular step, and it wasn't working properly, diagnose it type thing. What they were supposed to have sent was supposed to work, but it didn't work. So I corrected it, fixed it, talked about it in my interview steps, and then did the test exactly as they expected me to do it. And I didn't pass the interview. And I looked at the feedback, and the feedback said stuff like, well, this person didn't use this library. And I looked at the tasks, and it specifically said, complete this without using this library. And so I responded back and saying, excuse me, are you serious? Like, if you're telling me use best practices to fix this, do what you want, fine. But if you're telling me fix it the way I've told you to fix it, I didn't do it that way. I didn't think outside the box type thing. That's not that came across quite offensively too. So I sent quite a scathing email to them and said, "I'm glad I don't work for you." Because if that's how you treat people, like, are you expecting someone to magic something up that doesn't exist? That's how you get the wrong answer to the question. So I've been part of many bad interview processes, but that was the first technical test one that was like, I don't know what you want me to do.
What about if you think of your experience hiring people, is there any big regrets you have? Any kind of big fails you have had as a hiring manager, or perhaps you've seen one of your colleagues have when they've gone to hire someone?
I think the main one was about that person who typed like this, the person that we shouldn't have taken on that because of the bad interview feedback. I think that the main problem is when you get a bad job specification or bad understanding of why you are hiring to replace, right, and setting up the person to not succeed. For me, that's the biggest issue. But that's not been in the process that I've administered. I've seen it happen in other companies. So, sorry, there is one that comes to mind. Sorry, I forgot about this one. Okay, this wasn't a failure of mine, but it almost was because it was a process that I put together, and I was assisted by some team members, and I won't say which company it was. We were hiring internally and externally for data scientists, and so it was going to be really exciting. We wanted to get everyone interested in this, and I set up the job description, set up the interview process, and things like that. And we wanted to advertise in our internal jobs board. And our recruiting function very kindly wrote this advert that said, "Join our exiting data science team." And I thought, exiting data science team? Uh, a few months later, there were some redundancies, so it came more true than expected. But it was the fact that they didn't proofread what they wrote and thought, "Exiting? Are you serious?"
They're in HR. That's a Freudian slip. That's an inside information, maybe.
You never know. So maybe they were actually correct all along. But I said maybe I should say exciting rather than exiting. I don't know. Yeah, that's probably the biggest fail I'd be part of. But I mean, it wasn't really mine. This isn't a hard thing to do, right? If you do well and you write a good job description, the client has experience correctly, they should succeed. If something doesn't happen in that chain, yeah, okay, it's not going to go well.
What about, like, you've just painted this picture of a bit of a perfect storm, as you put it, in hiring, and this kind of arms race to the bottom with AI, where it's candidates applying with AI, companies maybe screening with AI, this kind of big, massive applications. And you've also said, okay, well, probably we're going to have to get back to more of a human based approach, like more face to face, more kind of live interviews, those types of things. A lot of this sounds like it could be at odds with a more objective, fairer approach, which is in theory a more standardized approach. So what about in this new world we're imagining of this more one-on-one, high-touch approach? Can you think of any ways that we could still have that as being quite objective and fair, even if it is a little bit kind of inconsistent between candidates?
Yeah, we talked a bit about this as well, but as I said, a lot of the things that would be good to do are sort of a bit more difficult to do nowadays. The number one would be something like having more diversity in the interview panel. That might be more difficult to do now that not everyone is working every day. If you had an in-person interview, it could be more easy to do with having remote interviews. But regardless, that's really important, and that will naturally lead to a remedy to the sorts of things like Amazon's automatic AI bot only hiring men type thing. That will naturally lead to a remedy of that because you have representation from other people. And they'll notice things that you don't notice as well. That has helped in the past. Stop trying to hire more of the same people that already exist in your company. Like that again goes to the Amazon AI jobs thing. But one of the great things about the team that I put together in my previous company was without selecting specifically for it, it was one of the best gender and culturally diverse teams I've ever worked in. And the real nice benefit of that wasn't the sort of DEI points thing, that I was proud of the team being the best candidates. It was the fact that the ideas that people suggested were the most diverse because it was a diverse team. And so when you had ideation sessions to workshop things, they were naturally a really great mix of ideas that I wouldn't have come up with before. And I remember interviewing at another company previously that were like, we want to hire people with PhDs from the great universities, such as me, I guess. And I thought, okay, if you only have a bunch of Oxford PhDs in a room, you're not going to get the best ideas. You're going to get a bunch of Oxford PhD ideas. And if you have one guy who does that, you've already ticked that box. You don't need any more. And I thought, why are you closing your pool of candidates to this? The only people who care about this stuff are the wrong people. I'll put it that way. If you've been through the experience, you'll understand how unpleasant an experience it can be. It's not gonna like hone the fire forge the best candidates ever type thing. Stop faking jobs.
You're saying basically the diversity of people then directly causally creates the diversity of ideas, which again, perhaps in consulting is even more valuable because you can go to the client with multiple.
I would say not even just in consulting. I'd say it's probably not direct. I would put it that way. But I think if it was, people would already be doing this, right? That's kind of the problem. But it is measurable. I'll give it a silly example. This isn't a consulting example. Women in tech obviously is a big problem. As in rather the number of women not in tech is the problem. So the number of products that get ideated and workshopped without consideration of women at all is silly, and it's 50% of the economy. So if you are designing a product and you've never spoken to a woman about it, or there isn't a woman in your team, you can expect that the ideas are bad, right? And so it's not surprising that that's kind of the problem. Self-evidently stupid stuff will make its way into the market because they never spoke to someone about it who had that particular gender bias. The scientific examples of this, a lot of the testing in laboratories was done on 100% albino male rats. And then the first time a drug might make it into a woman would be a human woman as they were about to have the drug for the first time, having gone through all the approvals. And you're thinking, are you serious? Like, no one thought about that. Yeah, so no one thought because there weren't any women there. Should it require this? No. Are we where we are? Yes. So we should probably just do it. So I would say that's probably the number one way. As a nice byproduct of the fact that you have a diverse team, you'll get this. Like that's a nice benefit to have. So I wouldn't say it's a direct, unfortunately, because otherwise, again, people will be doing this.
What about, yeah, hiring hero? Like, is there any one, if you think back over your whole career so far, anyone that sticks out to you that you feel like did or has done hiring in a particularly good or innovative or interesting way?
Yeah, I'm probably going to speak about my previous manager, Alan Logan from GlobalLogic. When we talked at the interview stage, we went far past the what are you coming in to do job wise, and we discussed the long term about what would you do if you had more team members type of thing. And I talked about the fact that I think there should be a data science team. We were a 500-person UK consultancy called ECS back then. We weren't doing data science, and I was surprised by that, thinking we have consultancy engagements with some of the biggest companies in the UK. A lot of those company engagements are digital transformation projects. So there's massive scope for we've put your data onto the cloud. Now what? Type discussions. So I was surprised by that, and so I talked about it in the interview, and I joined and saw the opportunities to do it, and said, "Can we do what we discussed in the interview?" And he said, "Yeah." So what you met with taking things forward. I mean, let's put aside to one moment. He was a fantastic person manager. But what you got when you joined was, oh, this company is filled with people who have that type of bubbling motivation, filled with non-traditional, interesting candidates, quite diverse candidates. A lot of the stuff that we talked about, but it wasn't selected for that. It was more a question of like, you get the CV, and he wouldn't be thinking, "Oh, sorry, it doesn't say doctor at the beginning of that." He'd be looking at the rest of it, the bits that are more than the 5 seconds that might be happening with some hiring managers type thing. So you got a really amazing pool of candidates go in, and then you'd interview them, and there'd be absolutely fascinating discussions about what they've accomplished in their careers because you had these people who were not out of the box, and that was great. Consultancies are interesting places, right? You're not necessarily working with people in the same practice as you. Most projects might be one or two people, and if it's a data science project, it's probably just going to be data scientists. But the people I met as data architects, data engineers, those people, so he ran the data practice, those people are still lifelong friends because they were just really cool people. Regardless of what the specific process is, if those are the people that make it through and then they become lifers, I think you've done your thing, you've done your job right.